Welcome to 2024, Riverbend. Ready or not, buckle up, because it's here. Oh, I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't know whether this will be better or worse politically, economically, culturally, militarily, globally. I don't know. But I do know that in the world that we live in, the people need a place like this. It's a place for people who have no place. I like to think of it as a church for people who don't like church. They need a place of grace. And this is our mission. This is our purpose. This is why we exist. To be a place where the misfits and the outcasts and the renegades and the people who don't fit in anywhere else can come together and find hope. In fact, we're beginning this year by remembering what it is that we are called to do, who it is we are called to be. And that reminder is coming to us from one chapter in the Bible, the 15th chapter of the book of Luke. In Luke chapter 15, Jesus tells his disciples and tells us 3 stories. And last week we began by looking at the first story. It is the story of the lost sheep. And the story of the lost sheep is a lesson about what it means to be called to serve, what it means to be called as sheep who become shepherds, that those who know grace show grace. It is an invitation for the inmates to run the asylum. And today we come to the second story, the story of the lost silver. And the story of the lost silver is a lesson in the priceless value of every individual. And in the world that we live in, that's really important for us to remember, because we live in a culture that is coaxing us to categorize everyone we meet. We are encouraged to think in terms of labels and groups, to put people in sort of association with their accomplishments or their abilities or their appearance. And this is a necessary thing. I understand it. It's almost a Darwinian thing. It's a social anthropology, an evolution of our society. 1,000 years ago, people lived in a village, and you may, in your lifetime, have only ever met 100 other people. And when that small number of people is in your experience, you have the opportunity to know them below the surface, to know more about them, to know their stories. But we meet 100 people before lunch. Between social media and the media outlets and the social encounters that we have, we can meet thousands and thousands of people over the course of our lifetime, and it's not possible for us to know everyone's individual story. So to kind of relate to the world that we live in and the people that populate it, we have to, by necessity, categorize people and group people and identify people's value by their associations and their accomplishments and their appearance. But I think we all know the liabilities of that. When we treat people as a collective rather than as individuals, it leads us to miss their value. And we as individuals know that we are not the people that we associate with, and we are not just what we appear to be, that we are more substantial. There's more to our story than it might appear. So today I want to talk about what it means to have a better way. Because there is a better way. There's a better way for us to relate to all of the people that we meet, even though we meet too many to understand them individually. The lesson of the lost silver is a lesson in seeing people as individuals rather than simply as part of a collective. It's a transforming story. But before we enter into the example of that story, would you pray with me for a moment? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight. that you would use your word spoken by your servant, anointed by your Spirit, to call us to see our value and the value of everyone we meet as priceless and precious. I pray that for myself and for my family and for all of us here, for I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. I've told this story before, but it's a story that really shaped my life. It took place when I was in elementary school. I grew up and went to a rural elementary school. We didn't have middle schools or multiple elementary schools in my school district. We just had one elementary school, and it was K through 8. And it was designed in the 1950s, and it had three kind of pods of classrooms. One of the pods of classrooms was K through 2, and another pod of the classrooms was 3 through 5, and another one of the pods of the classroom was 6th, 7th, and 8th. And these three pods of classrooms were connected by this giant auditorium / cafeteria / airplane hangar. It was a giant room in which all of our gathered activities took place. Our basketball team played in there. We had all of our gym classes in there. It was also a stage for a theater. We had our assemblies in there, and it's also where we ate our lunch. There was a cafeteria, a kitchen at one end with a cafeteria line, and it had tables, metal tables, that kind of cool, folded up into the walls. And so it had linoleum tile floors and painted cinder block walls and a metal roof. So when you put 200 elementary school students in there for lunch, the sound was deafening. So our teachers would patrol the lunchroom with whistles, trying to keep the decibel level below about 120. And what happened in my school was there was a class of students who were called the special education class. Over in the K through 2 wing, there was one room, and there were 14 to 18 students in this one class, and they were the students who academically and developmentally couldn't keep up, couldn't mainstream with the rest of the students their age, and so they had a special class. And they sat together at one table in our cafeteria at lunch. And there was one student who was in that class, and he was in that class the entire time that I was at that elementary school until I graduated and went to high school out of 8th grade, and his name was Rudy. And about the time we were in 4th or 5th grade, we realized that Rudy had a very special talent. In the middle of whatever was going on in the room, Rudy could hear a coin that was dropped onto the tile linoleum floor. In the midst of the cacophony of the children talking at lunch, Rudy somehow could hear a coin hitting the floor, and as soon as he heard it, he would jump up from his seat, and he would run to the source where he thought the coin was, and if he found it, he would pick it up, and he would ask, "Who owns this coin? Can I please have it?" Well, my classmates, by the time we were in 6th or 7th grade, realized they could taunt Rudy with this talent. And they began to intentionally throw coins to watch Rudy chase them through the cafeteria. In fact, they developed a particular ability to toss the coins across the cafeteria under the table where all the girls would gather. And Rudy would fearlessly dive underneath the tables, chasing the coins, and the girls would appropriately stand up and scream and giggle and make a fuss about Rudy being under the table, and he would come out and ask if he could have the coin. Now, I don't believe that I ever participated in this with my classmates. I'm pretty sure that I never tossed coins for Rudy to chase. It was too cheap. I wasn't going to give coins away. But I can't promise you that I didn't laugh. I can't promise you that I didn't join in with my classmates and laugh at Rudy when he would dive under the table full of girls. But what I can promise you is that I didn't stand up for Rudy. that I didn't stand up and say to my friends, stop this. This is wrong. You're taunting and mocking Rudy is not good behavior. Cut it out. I don't remember ever doing that. And I know now in my life that that was the thing that I should have done, because participating in that was wrong. And I would imagine if we took a survey of everyone in the room today and everyone online, that 100% of us would say, yes, Dave, you are right, that behavior was wrong. But I'm suspicious that we would say it was wrong for the wrong reasons. That the right thing to do was to stand up for Rudy, but the reason that we do it is wrong. You see, we have developed in our culture a kind of faux compassion. We have developed an empathy and a sympathy that we express socially, but it's disingenuous because it's based on pity. And feeling sorry for someone is not the same as actually caring about someone. And we have propagated this belief that compassion is an expression of the strong caring for the weak. That those who have are caring for those who have not. Those with more are caring for those with less or who are worth less. And our compassion is built on this framework of this idea that I can help you when you can't help yourself. That somehow you are limited in your capacities and your abilities, and therefore you are less than me. And because of my capacities and because of my generosity, I will bend down to help you. It's a faux compassion. It's a compassion that is based on pity. It's not a compassion that's based on care. It's not a compassion that's based on affection. In fact, it's actually based on arrogance and pride. But there is a better way, and it's the way of the lost silver. In Luke chapter 15, in just 3 verses, verses 8, 9, and 10, Jesus tells us a story. And he says in verse 8, he says, suppose that there is a woman, imagine a woman who has 10 silver coins, and all of a sudden she realizes that she has lost one of her 10 silver coins. Jesus said, would she not light a lamp and sweep the whole house and search through it carefully until she finds it? Wouldn't she do that? And then when she finds it, would she be reasonable to call her neighbors and to celebrate that with them and say, rejoice with me because the coin that I thought I had lost is now found? And then in verse 10, Jesus says, in the same way, there is much rejoicing in heaven among God's angels when even one single sinner repents. Now, the common way for us to understand this, and the way most people understand the lesson of this parable, and you have to realize the parables are illustrations, and they have layers of interpretation. You can personalize parables, and they have sort of a generic teaching that you can draw multiple lessons from it. But the most common lesson of the parable of the lost silver we get from verse 10. That it has to do with celebrating the repentance of even one. And undoubtedly, Jesus is telling the religious leaders who are quantifying their spirituality, are saying, yes, you get excited when there's a quantity of spirituality. God gets excited over the individuality of spirituality. And there's no doubt that that lesson is there. But I've seen this lesson get twisted, and it gets toxic because it's interpreted as we celebrate the transformation, which we should do. We should celebrate any transformation. A person whose life was falling apart that manages to get it together, we should celebrate that. The person who is stricken and beaten down by addiction and they enter into recovery, we should celebrate that. The person who is wandering far from God, who turns and gives their life over and their life is redeemed, we should always celebrate those things. But the toxic interpretation of this says before they repent, before they change their life, we can really ignore them. That their value is in their penitence, not their value is in who they are. And this toxic interpretation is a misunderstanding of what Jesus is saying. Because if we really want to understand, I think the core of what Jesus is getting at is in verse 8. In verse 8, he says there's a woman who has 10 silver coins and she loses one. To really understand what Jesus is talking about, we have to have a lesson in economics. And I am the last person who should be talking about finances or economics. I know there are many of you who have degrees in finance. You've made a fortune in hedge funds and in managing money. We even have PhDs and professors in economics in the Riverbend community. So I'm embarrassed to talk about economics, but allow me to represent economics at sort of a very basic level. At a meta level, economics involves money. You didn't know that, did you? Well, I have money. I have $111. This is what's called cash, in case some of you haven't seen it in a while. And because you have braved the elements and come in out of the cold, everyone will be receiving $111, and those of you at home get nothing. No, that's not true at all. But this is paper money. And this is a $1 bill, this is a $10 bill, and this is a $100 bill. You know what the difference is between the 1 and the 10 and the 100? 0. The 1 has no zeros, the 10 has 1 zeros, and the $100 bill has 2 zeros. And that's the difference. This is just paper. It represents something. What it represents is belief. What it represents is that we believe that this is worthy of exchange for something, goods, and services. You see, economics is not really a financial system, it's a faith system. You know, what does it say on the back of our money? Look on every coin and on every bill, it says 4 words: in God we trust. You didn't realize that America was such a faith-filled country. But economics is really a belief system. We assign value to things and representative value to our currency. Because real economics is just a barter system. If you go back a couple thousand years and I'm a farmer and I grow wheat, and at the end of the harvest, I have enough wheat to feed my family for a year, and I store that up, but I have extra wheat left over. What do I do with that extra wheat? Well, I exchange it for goods and services that I need. For example, if my wife is pregnant and she needs a rocking chair to sit in and then to nurse the baby in, I go into town and I find a carpenter and I say, "Can you build me a rocking chair?" And the carpenter says, "Yes, I'll be glad to build you a rocking chair, but it will take me a month." It's a really nice rocking chair. And so you say, "What can I give you for the rocking chair?" He says, "Well, I have to feed my family for a month if it takes me a month to make the rocking chair." And you calculate that it takes 3 bushels of wheat to feed his family for a month. So the rocking chair is worth 3 bushels of wheat. And because it's not convenient to carry around rocking chairs and bushels of wheat, we represent that value with money. Or in our day, we don't even represent it with cash. We represent it with the idea of money. Because we never actually see the money. The money is just a number that appears on a ledger. It's a plastic card that we stick into a machine that says, okay, you can get the gas that is worth $40 for 2 or 3 gallons now, and you put it in your car. Because this figmentary, imaginary idea of money is how we operate. We assign value. It's a belief system. But if economics is this elegantly complicated belief system, what is even more complicated is how we assign value to people. Because we do it all the time. We assign worth and we assign value to people. Do you know who Shohei Ohtani is? Shohei Ohtani is a Japanese baseball player who signed a contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers a couple months ago to play baseball for them for $70 million a year for 10 years. He signed a $700 million contract. The only other person I know that makes that kind of money got fired as the coach of Texas A&M University. That's real money, $700 million to play baseball. Because we assigned value to him and said, you are worth 700 million of these imaginary dollars. You know who Pablo Picasso is? Pablo Picasso was a painter at the beginning of the 20th century, and he's one of the rare artists who became famous during his lifetime. And near the end of his life, in the last season of his life, Pablo Picasso never paid for anything. Because if he walked into a cafe, they were so honored to have the great Pablo Picasso eat with them, they comped him his meals. People gave him his clothes. They gave him a place to live. And they were admirers of his art, and they attributed to him this particular value. There's an urban legend about Pablo Picasso going into a cafe in a town where no one knew who he was. And he and his friends ate the meal, and at the end of the meal, the waiter came and presented him with the bill, and he just kind of waved it off, like, I don't pay for meals. And the waiter insisted and said, well, you have to pay. He's like, don't you know who I am? And apparently no one in the restaurant knew who he was. So he said, okay, I'll pay you the bill. And the story goes that he took a napkin, and he sketched on the napkin and handed the waiter the napkin, signed it. And the waiter said, what is this? He said, this is the payment for the bill. And the waiter said, that took you like 5 minutes to draw that thing. And Picasso said, no, it took me 40 years to learn how to draw that in 5 minutes. A sketch by Pablo Picasso today that is authenticated and hand-signed by him can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think that covered the lunch. In fact, there was a painting that just sold at auction a few years ago. It's called The Women of Algiers, version 0. And it sold at auction for $179.4 million. That's a lot of lunches. So how do we place value on people in the economics, the complex economics, and the complex valuation system in which we live, where we're making calculations by association, by ability, and by capacity? How do we do it? You see, with God, there is no such ambiguity. In God's economy, there is no doubt what every person is worth, because every person is worth exactly the same. Genesis chapter 1, the very first chapter in the Bible, and down in verse 26 and 27, God says, let us make man in our image. And the priceless, infinite, eternal, transcendent value of God is imprinted on every person we meet. Now, granted, some of them have it layered under a whole lot of crap. And it's hard to see that imago Dei, but it's there. And you want to know how to value everyone you meet, whether they're rich or poor, successful or anonymous, whether they are accomplished or a failure. They are made in the imago Dei. They are made in the image of God. It is the lesson of the lost silver. Because the woman had 10 coins and she lost 1. The word there is drachma. And in the economics of Jesus' day, there were 3 kinds of currency. There was the ancient Greek currency, which was represented by the drachma. When the Roman Empire, at the time of Jesus, was printing currency, they printed an equivalent coin to the drachma called the denarius. And the Jews kept their own money, and they had their primary currency was called a shekel. And a shekel was worth 4 denarius or 4 drachma. And a drachma and a denarius was worth a single day's wages. In Matthew chapter 20, when Jesus tells the story of the parable of the vineyard workers, he says the vineyard owner offered to pay each of the workers a drachma for a day's work. If you're wondering how that scales out, there's also a coin in the New Testament called a talent. A talent is 6,000 drachma. A talent is the equivalent of a lifetime of wages. A drachma, what this woman's lost, was 1 day's wages. But she doesn't say she had a variety of coins. She had 10 coins that were all of equal value. And what does it say in Jesus' story? It says, suppose that a woman has 10 silver coins. She has 10 drachma, and she loses 1 drachma. That 1 drachma was as important as any of the other drachma. That was as important as all of the other coins combined. That their worth was not measured in equivalency. It was measured because she saw the value in that drachma. This is the lesson of the lost silver. The lesson of the lost silver is that every one of us is a priceless individual made in the image of God. And everyone you meet is a priceless individual made in the image of God. I wish I had known that. And I should have known that. Of all the people in my school, I should have known that. When we were tossing coins and making Rudy chase them in the cafeteria, I should have known better. See, one day after school, after all of my classmates had left, I was staying after school, and I wandered down to the pod where the kindergarten through 2nd grade classrooms were, where the special education classroom was. And I walked in there, and I saw Rudy through the door, and Rudy was sitting at his desk, and it was covered in coins, and he was counting the coins, and there was joy on his face as he was counting the coins because his teacher was kneeling next to him. And his teacher was rehearsing with Rudy that 5 of these pennies equals 1 nickel. And 2 of these nickels equal 1 dime. And 2 of these dimes and 1 nickel equal a quarter. And 4 of these quarters equal $1. And he patiently walked Rudy through that. And Rudy said, again. And then he did it again. 5 pennies equals a nickel. 2 nickels equal a dime. 2 dimes and a nickel equal a quarter. 4 quarters equal $1. And I found out that this wasn't the first time Rudy had asked the teacher to do that. In fact, Rudy, for the 8 years that he was in that classroom, asked his teacher to count out the coins for him 3 and 4 times a week. And his teacher patiently kneeled by Rudy's desk after everyone had gone and rehearsed the same story over and over again. And you know how I know that took place? Because that teacher was my father. My dad was the special education teacher in my elementary school. He had his master's degree in special education, and he devoted his life to the precious lives of those children in that special education class. The son of a father like that, the child of a father like that, should know the precious value of every one of them, of every one of us. You see, the lesson of the lost silver is a lesson that runs in the face of the cultural realities in which we live. The cultural categorization, our inclination to judge people by their tribes or by their groups, by their associations or their abilities or their accomplishments or their appearance. But there is a better way to think of each of ourselves, each of us, as made in the image of God, as priceless and precious, as worth pursuing, as worth searching for, as worth dying for. And not only are we individually of that high value, everyone you meet is of that same value. See, this is the attribute that should be in the DNA of this place. This is who we are called to be. This is our mission, to see ourselves as priceless and to see everyone we meet as priceless. In the lessons that Jesus gives in Luke chapter 15, the lesson of the sheep, the lost silver, and the lost son. Last week we talked about the lesson of the lost sheep. The lesson that the one is worth pursuing, that in that pursuit, the sheep become the shepherd. Those who know grace show grace. The inmates do run the asylum. And the second lesson is the lesson of the lost silver. The lesson that says everyone you meet, including the person in the mirror, is a priceless, worth pursuing person possessing the image of God. And next week we'll look at the third parable, and we'll spend 3 weeks looking at this because it's the cornerstone of our mission, the lesson of the lost son. In fact, it's so crucial to what we do. It's painted on the wall of this building when you walk in, the image of the son returning to his father. But all of these are reminders to us of why we do what we do. Because I don't know whether or not the world that we live in is going to go to hell in a handbasket. I don't know whether it's going to be more chaotic than it's ever been. I don't know what's going to happen politically or economically or culturally or militarily or globally, but I do know this, that this will be a place for people who have no place, that this will be a place of grace, and we are called to be those people. Welcome to 2024, Riverbend.